Our scripture this morning is in two parts. First, we have Genesis 1. Then God said, "Let us make humanity in our image to resemble us so that they may take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and all the crawling things on earth." God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them. Male and female, God created them.
Thank you, Carol. Friends, in just a moment, I'm going to read a part of the Gospel of John that's known as the Farewell Discourse. So those are the chapters 13 through 17 of the Gospel of John. And at the beginning of this discourse, in the very first few chapters of the discourse, Jesus is teaching the disciples about what's going to happen. And he gave them as much information as he could. He kept repeating it to them over and over again, as well as reminding them of how they would be cared for in the future. But now we turn to Jesus' words at the end of the farewell discourse. And as I'm reading this morning, I want to invite you to notice what Jesus is doing here. Let's hear these words from Jesus. "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me." So did you notice what was Jesus doing here? He wasn't teaching or preaching, at least not in a direct way. He was praying, right? He was simply praying for the disciples, and not only for them, but for those who will believe in me, believe in Jesus through the message of the disciples for generations to come. And in fact, Jesus was praying for the church today, for you and for me. And in this part of John, Jesus is praying for what? For unity, right? That they may be one, so that they may be brought to complete unity. So if you think this morning about the whole church, now I'm not just talking about Castleton or the United Methodist Church, but the church in general, the church universal. Do we find a united church today? In so many ways we don't, right? And those who claim to be united by Christ are divided in so many ways, and that's especially true when it comes to race. It's something that Dr. King noted, that 11 a.m. on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. A segregation in the church, as taught by Dr. King, is a tragedy and a moral injustice, but it also denies our witness of unity to the world and our belief that God created all of us. Our image of holiness is often defined by what and who we see. And what I mean is that if this is the only image of Jesus that we see, then what do we probably think about holiness? Now, this is the image of Jesus I grew up with, and I understand the desire to relate to Jesus. I get that, depicting him in different ways. But when this is one's primary image of Jesus, then it's easy to grow up thinking that good, holy, or divine imagery is found in whiteness. And it might be more subconscious than we think. But it's likely there in our image of God and even how we then view our neighbor. So one small start to challenging the divide that exists is through maybe using some different imagery as well. Images like these. Or the historical Jesus, or what's named the historical Jesus. and maybe even changing up who we read as well. We've been challenged before in discipleship moments by Chris to diversify our reading. And again, I'm going to share that with you this morning as a way to challenge us to change who we read as a way to open up the words that God might be giving to us. Because the early words of the Bible remind us that in the divine image, God created who? Everybody, right? All of humanity is created in God's own image. Every race, every nationality, every ethnicity. And the church cannot forget this truth, which means that we should not neglect Black History Month, to lift up and celebrate voices that we don't hear as much as we should. And if we believe in the Imago Dei, a Latin phrase that means in the image of God, a theological concept describing how every person is made in the image of God, then the church would take serious this call to reflect unity and diversity of all of God's people. And I've tried to take this seriously as a pastor, that I want to learn from, I want to celebrate all the diverse voices of God's people. And I try to see the image of God in all of you, all of us, in our staff. I also see the image of God in my friend Emorja. I also hear it too. Did you hear the voice of God in him? So I'm delighted to have him with us this morning, and we're going to share in a little bit of a dialogue today. And so, Emorja, I want to invite you to grab a mic, and we're going to come over here to these chairs. So it's great to have you with us this morning, and I thought we could dialogue just a bit this morning on a few topics, in particular music and race. But first, I have to share that our time in South Bend together, I learned a lot from you, and I certainly appreciate that. We had weekly conversations on music and race and the diversity that we could bring into the life of the church and lift up those different voices. But I have to tell you, I remember one time when we were looking at music. I don't remember what Sunday it was. I was flipping through the hymnal, and I stopped at this particular hymn. I said, "There's no way we're singing this hymn. No way." And I flipped the page, and Emorja said, "Well, hold on. That's a good one." Can you guess what the special music was that next Sunday from my music director? And it also ended up on his Facebook page or YouTube channel. Do you remember that?
With blood drawn from Emmanuel's vein.
So the funny thing is, so this was the anthem that Sunday, and Pastor Emily, who was on staff with us at the time, leaned over to me and said, "I think you just got played by a hymn." I think I did. But you taught me don't discount the power of an unknown hymn, but also don't underestimate the power of music.
Yeah.
And you know that well. So from perspective of a church musician, of a professor of music, what can you tell us about the power of music in worship?
I'm learning more and more that music, although they say music is a universal language, I grew up with that thinking, but I'm also getting to a point where sometimes, although it's universal, it doesn't mean that it's understood by everybody. Music, especially with music that stems from the practices of the African diaspora, it stems from an experience. Music is part of the social life. When you go to Ghana, and I visited Ghana, I visited Kenya, Cape Town, but it's part of their identity, from births to marriages to deaths to eldership, rituals. It's part of what they do, and so music and dance work hand in hand. And the power of music in that community means life. And I can only speak for that, but even the other cultures that I study, music, it has a power to bring together people, even if just for a moment, so that way they can feel and know that they are not alone. It is literally a magnet, and so I realize that music has power, and it's used as a balm for more than one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and you talked about being coming from our experience, and we talk a lot about discipleship being, transformation of life and heart. And so would you say, that's a part of that it comes from our experience of God and Christ in our lives?
Oh yeah, certainly. And one thing too, I know there are many scholars who talk about this, but even like James Cone, we have Horace Boyer, people who from the theologian side and folks who are on the music side, but the question is, especially as we think about God and Jesus, like what is the God, who is the God that we are serving? Is it the same God that the enslaved Africans would serve compared to those who were the enslavers? Because we had to get to a point where we recognize that how can we serve that God who allowed us to be captured? Where's the God of the oppressed? So even in knowing that, as I learn and I grow up, it is like, which God is the one that I know has my heart? Do we serve that same God? The God who is on the side of justice, or the God who ensures that there is still a strong line of separation based upon certain socioeconomic statuses? What is that God?
Yeah. So my favorite theologian, who is Howard Thurman. You remember that well. So who's also depicted in this picture to your right, up here in the front. Howard Thurman often distinguished between Christianity and the Master and the way of Jesus because of what you're talking about. That differentiation between the two. That we follow Jesus first and foremost. That He is out front, and we follow Him. And so we've been watching a documentary, as I mentioned this morning, on history of Black church in America. And tonight, just a little teaser, it's going to bring up a little bit of music and worship as a part of that. So perfect that you're here today. Yeah. So what would you tell us about the experience of music in the Black church?
Man. So growing up in Divine Springs, Florida, grew up in Black church, but I also was privileged to visit other churches that were non-Black, so predominantly white churches. And I understood the importance of community through song in the sense of how it relates to us as spiritual beings. So for example, some practices that you may hear in music could be the syncopation of the rhythm. It could be call and response where there's a strong component where there's an audience and then the leader, and sometimes through this participatory presentation, the lines get blurred, in the sense of who is the leader, who is the congregation, compared to the presentational performance where you have a very strict, these are the people that's leading, and you and the audience are just there to enjoy and not say anything. But with the Black church, it taught me how to be flexible. It taught me how to think in the moment, but yet I also would hear these sounds that my elders would sing, and some things that were printed in black and white in the hymnal, you would get the words, but we had the privilege and the opportunity to make some things up as we go along, because people just understood that was the practice, and they knew how to adjust. I came from a church where I've had actually the benefit of being a member of a Baptist church, but I've played at African Methodist Episcopal churches, I've played at Pentecostal churches, I've played at non-denominational. And what I realize is that although there are different theologies that they may believe in, there is still this shared experience that we can say comes from the practice of the African diaspora. People speaking in tongues, people running, people shouting, dancing, crying. That is part of that tradition, and those are all of the things that made me who I am. And so I can say that the Black church is certainly the first institution for higher learning. And I say that because the Black church is an academy by itself. It teaches people how to become public speakers, writers, poets, composers. It is a school by itself. And so, and the church choir also is an agent of teaching as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I know you and I talked about this some in South Bend, and you shared with us today some spirituals, but what's your thoughts on a predominantly white congregation singing Negro spirituals?
Yes.
What's your thoughts on that?
And thank you for saying Negro spirituals, because a lot of people say Black spirituals or African American spirituals, but it certainly is Negro spirituals because it speaks to a time in which those songs were created as to what they were also considered. So, yes, I do believe that any Black music is an art form. Do I have my differences of opinions when it comes to certain spirituals? Yes. I personally, I don't see there's a problem for anyone singing, the Still Away, the Swing Low Sweet Chariots, or, We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder, or any of those. But I do believe that it would be hard for someone who is of the community, that extends from that community, who had to, suffer and who was also oppressed at some point. It would be hard for me to understand a white person singing a song, "Is Master Gonna Sell Us Tomorrow?" I just don't see it. But I think with anyone who is studying this music, you have to be cognizant of the message you're trying to convey. Why are you singing this? What message are you trying to get across to your audience? And do you actually have any connection with this? Now, I will say there are a lot of times when I did opera and I did a lot of stuff at Notre Dame, some of those songs I ain't have no connection to. I did because they asked me to do it, and I did. But I realized that even in that moment where I was being taught something, I did learn something as well. So you have to just have enough discernment to know what's right and what's like muddy waters.
Yeah, and I think sometimes just in general in church, we don't often know the context of a lot of the hymns that we sing, and whether that, it tends to be spirituals or even some of the hymnals or hymns in the hymnal itself. We don't always know the historical context. There's a lot of meaning to them. And so, I know we talked a lot about that in South Bend, like how can we convey the meaning of some of the Negro spirituals to place them in that sort of spiritual context that we can all appreciate and connect with. So I think that's really important. And I shared this morning just a little bit about how we see diversity in God's people and honor that. For me, imagery is big, as well as like changing my reading patterns and making sure I'm not only reading a certain group of people, but trying to diversify how God is speaking through all kinds of different people. And so I just want to ask you, so what do you hope the church would do to tear down some of the barriers and divisions among us? Like, what would that look like for you?
That's
a huge question.
That's tough, especially with where we are now. I do believe that there are certain characteristics that makes certain churches unique. I do know that when it comes down to the performance of the Western European hymn, there is a practice. When it comes down to gospel music, there is a practice. Sometimes the people who are proficient in both of those different things are usually a particular community, but it doesn't have to be. As long as you're in a place where you're willing to learn and respect other cultures that may not be your own, and that you always stay open and a sponge, so therefore you can carry that knowledge on to somebody else. I can see the church in a space where we have this intercultural sharing among one another. But sometimes, honestly, I believe it's easier said than done. Sure. I do have faith. I also live by what I see in some places too. I look at people's patterns, but I do know that there are people who are always going to go against the grain and to challenge their community to be better. So I even thank you for bringing me here as well too, because I know with where we are in our world, some things are very icky, and it gets like really, it's sensitive in some spaces. But the hard conversations have to be had, and that's the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the church is an opportunity to really break down those walls of separation, right? And an opportunity today to do that. And historically, we've struggled there. But I think we have an opportunity to say that we're going to live out the Imago Dei, right? We're going to say that we see the image of God in all people. And I think one of the powerful ways we do that is through the gift of music, which is what you and the choir and Nina and everybody brings to us every single Sunday, is that gift of music that can break down barriers. And different styles, certainly voices, instruments, but it's all about the glory of God and also uniting together to sing God's praises. And I think back to St. Augustine, that he who sings prays twice. And so there's power in music. And you see that culturally, right? That culturally, music will break down those barriers. You see that in younger folks decades ago, but even today, right? Of the sharing of music, that can be a big piece of it. And I think that's one of the gifts that Emorja brings us, but Emorja brings to the larger church, as well as his teaching too. But I have to say, so a few years ago, as I was preparing to be with all of you here at Castleton, I was at First Church and wrapping up my time in South Bend, and there was this newer kind of worship song that just spoke to me of the power of God's presence in my life to lead me through this time of transition. Transitions are always hard, but I think that the beautiful message of the gospel, but also music, is that God is always with us. And so there was this beautiful song called "He'll Be With You," written by a friend of mine who he taught us this song at First Church that then just kind of led me through that time of transition. It was really kind of a spiritual discipline for me to listen to this song on repeat. Then to have him teach us at our congregation was just a gift. And so I invited him to teach us this morning. I think you could teach us this hymn?
Yeah, we got it.